Hello everyone, this is Chris Reed, Product Manager at Enable Technologies. In this video, I'll be showing you how you can configure N-Central to generate tickets in Autotask using ticketing recipients. To begin, log into your N-Central server and at either the system level or the service organization level, navigate to Administration, PSA Integration, and then Configure PSA Integration. Choose Autotask from the drop-down menu, and then enable the Generate Tickets Based on Notifications option. In the username and password field, provide N-Central with an Autotask username and password that has sufficient rights to generate tickets. And in the ticketing errors section, enter the email address of who should get notified if N-Central cannot generate tickets in Autotask. For example, if there's a temporary network outage between N-Central and Autotask, or if the Autotask user account's password has been changed and N-Central hasn't yet been updated, an email will be sent to this email address to alert that person of the issue. Finally, click Save. N-Central will test that the credentials you provided were successful in authenticating to Autotask's APIs. Now, if you take a look at that PSA integration menu, there's a new option called Ticketing. In here, you can create ticketing recipients. And a ticketing recipient is the recipient for a notification. So what we're going to do is create a ticketing recipient that's going to create a ticket with a certain set of properties and a certain set of behaviors whenever a notification gets fired in N-Central. To begin, click Add. N-Central will synchronize with Autotask. All of the queues, properties, sources, statuses, and so on are pulled dynamically from Autotask at this time so that you're always dealing with the most up-to-date information from Autotask. Give the ticketing recipient a name. In this case, we're going to target server down issues. Once we've filled out the name and the description, we can then configure what queue the ticket should get generated in and what sort of properties that ticket should have. So I can choose here from my queues, I want to choose Managed Services Alerts. It's a critical issue because it's a server. The source is going to be a monitoring alert. The status is going to be new. And I can go ahead and configure the rest of the options that you see here. Maybe it's a network maintenance issue. Maybe it's a hardware problem, and so on. So I can choose what sort of properties I want this ticket that gets generated to have. I can also choose what SLA I wish to create the ticket underneath, and what contact and contract I want to use when this ticket gets generated. Configuring the ticketing contact and contract are covered in a different video about Autotask that talks about how you can export customers and devices into Autotask. This won't be covered off in this video. On the next tab, you can configure how N-Central should behave whenever an alert is generated, a notification is generated in N-Central, and what happens when N-Central detects that an issue has gone back to a normal state. So the first option is, when N-Central generates a ticket, do you want the notification in N-Central to be acknowledged? You do. By default, that's turned on, because you don't want it to escalate past the primary recipient in N-Central. The next option is, what do you want to do when an issue is resolved? The default option is to do nothing in terms of changing the ticket status, but to just add a note to the ticket saying that the service has gone back to a normal state. Alternately, though, you can choose to change the status of a ticket to a different status. Perhaps instead of it being in progress, maybe what you want to do is change it to be waiting for information, or waiting for confirmation, or some other status that makes sense. What's interesting is that you can also configure N-Central to only change that ticket status if the ticket is already in a certain status. For example, maybe if the ticket's in progress, I don't want it to actually change the status of the ticket because it's in progress, my technician hasn't added his final notes, or perhaps hasn't added his time to that ticket. So what I'll do is I'm going to choose other statuses that I'm going to say, you know what, if it's in any of these statuses, it's okay for N-Central to go ahead and change that to be waiting for information in this case. If I want to filter this list to make it a little bit easier to see, I can choose to show only the selected statuses. And now I understand that, you know what, N-Central is only going to change the ticket status to waiting for information if it's in one of these states. Very flexible, very handy option to have. In the next section, I can configure how I want N-Central to handle repeat failures. For example, if a CPU service keeps going back and forth between failed and normal, the first time that the CPU service goes failed on that particular device, N-Central opens up a time window that lasts for however many hours you define here. If the service continues to go back to normal and then to failed again, and back to normal and failed again, within that time window, and Central will not generate a new ticket. Instead, it will either update the existing ticket, or if the ticket has been closed, it will reopen it. Optionally, when it gets reopened, you can change the ticket status to be something different. In the next section, you can configure how it is that you want N-central to determine that Windows event log issues are in fact duplicates of one another on a particular device. You can choose to look for the ID, the source, or the body, the description of the event log. Depending on what sort of event log monitoring you're doing, and what sort of event log entries the applications on that device perform, you may want to only match on things like the ID or the source. You may want to exclude looking at the description and say, you know what, so long as the ID and the source are the same, it's actually a duplicate ticket. Finally, down below, I can choose to associate this ticketing recipient to whatever notification profiles I wish. In this case, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and associate this to 0-minute delay. That's one of the stock notifications that come within Central. I want to make sure that if a server goes down, if a server has an issue, it gets generated right away. If I click Save, the ticketing recipient is now saved. I can see the name of it, I can see the description of it, I can see what notifications it is associated to. If I go to the configuration menu and go to Monitoring and then Notifications, if I click on 0-minute delay, I can see that there is the ticketing recipient that I just created. So ticketing recipients look like normal user accounts when you're dealing with the notification profile. They're just another recipient that you can choose here to receive a notification when N-central detects that an issue has been found. Let's go back to the ticketing recipients page. I've now created a ticketing recipient for server down, and if I wanted to, I could create a ticketing recipient for other issues, workstations having problems, printers being down, and so on. Each ticketing recipient is going to represent a ticketing queue and also the properties that you want that ticket to be created with. The work issue, the sub-issue, the status, and so on. There's another example, though, of when it is that I'd want to create a different type of ticketing recipient. Let's go ahead and create another one. And this time, what I want to do is create a ticketing recipient that is going to add a time entry to a ticket. And the reason that I want it to do that is because N-central is going to be performing a self-healing task or a scheduled task on my behalf, and I want that to automatically log time against the ticket. So I'm going to create a ticketing recipient called self-healing. And you can go ahead and fill out all the ticket details however it is that you need them to be filled out. Maybe you want to have a separate queue for those automated tasks that N-central is performing. Maybe you want those tickets to go into an existing queue. What's important here is not so much the details of the ticket details tab or the notification settings tab. What's important is the time entry tab. On this tab, you can say whenever N-central generates a notification that goes to this ticketing recipient, you want it to automatically generate a time entry. So you can choose which contract that entry goes underneath. In this case, the value that is configured on the mappings page. You can choose what work type you want it to be. Maybe you want it to be network maintenance work. You can choose what role this should be associated to. You can choose what status the time entry should have, or sorry, the ticket should have when it is when the time entry is added to it. Perhaps, for example, we want to have it as being help desk status. You can choose whether or not you want to make it billable, whether it should be shown on your customer's invoices, and you can also choose how many hours you want to associate for this ticket. You can also choose to offset the hours. Maybe you want to downgrade it or upgrade it. And you can then choose notes like generated by a self-healing task. Finally, you can choose which resource the time entry will be associated to, and you can then click Save. Now what you can do is in your service templates or when you're looking at a device, you can associate the self-healing ticketing recipient as a recipient for the notifications that are being generated by that self-healing task, or that are being generated by the scheduled task that you generate to do like a one-off script or a one-off maintenance routine, that sort of thing. So as you can see, N-central's got a really powerful way of creating tickets in Autotask for you. It's very, very flexible. You can create as many ticketing recipients as you want, and they can be used not only to generate tickets on your behalf when N-central detects that a monitoring issue has occurred. They can also be used whenever a scheduled task runs or a self-healing task runs. And in that way, you can show your customer value of what you're doing by associating time to those scheduled tasks and to those self-healing tasks.